Hi, you guys. Welcome back to Blonde Apologist. It feels really good to be back to be recording after a great Christmas break. I hope you had a good holiday season. And I'm so excited for the new year and just all the things that we're going to talk about and the time we'll share with one another. So thanks for being here. I am starting off the new year by talking about the role and influence of women in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And considering 92% of my listeners are women, I felt like this was appropriate and also necessary. So today I sit down with my guest, Sarah Collins. She's the producer of the podcast Magnify, which is a great one to check out if you haven't. And we just have a meaningful conversation about some of the misconceptions surrounding women's role in the church and why our influence matters more than ever. We explore how God is calling us to stand up, to speak out, and to make a difference right where we are. So whether you felt maybe overlooked or you're wondering how you can contribute more, this episode is going to fill you with encouragement, and we share lots of personal stories and practical ways to embrace and magnify your unique role in God's plan. So welcome to Blonde Apologist. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Blonde Apologist. Today I am joined by Sarah Collins of the Magnify podcast. So welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thanks, Lauren. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. I feel you're the perfect person for this conversation. The goal today is we're going to talk about the role of women and our call to be of an influence in our communities and our homes and in the church.
Yeah.
So I'm excited.
I'm so excited. So my work and my background is I'm a podcast producer for LDS Living. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you saying that you think I'm one of the best people to come on for that. I don't think so. I think I've just been right place, right time with a lot of things. And I've been able to interact with women who do stand up to that call. So
well, and that's why I thought of you, because the Magnify podcast, if you're not familiar, it's for women of the church. What would you say the theme is for Magnify?
Yeah, so kind of our tagline or something we hope that it encourages women is to be better influences of Jesus Christ in their life. It's supposed to be uplifting and, weekly episodes that we just bring topical and things that are on our minds and things that can help deeper learning, kind of a smattering of those types of topics. And the mission that I love about it is that we're women who live different. And I think that sometimes in the gospel, it's like, especially here in Utah or just if you're in a certain community, it's like, well, I'm not different. I'm just like everyone else. But I think just choosing to live like the Savior, maybe that doesn't mean you look different or you are super unique or edgy or whatever that different kind of thing is, which is great if that's your flavor. But it's that you're choosing to live like the Savior is choosing to live different than the rest of the world live differently.
Yeah. It's so good. And like you said, you've been there for a couple years.
Yeah. So I started producing the Magnify podcast specifically in September 2022, which is actually when it launched. So I was kind of on the ground with it. And then,
okay. Amazing.
Yeah. Super fun. And then since then, just working on our LDS Living podcasts as well, having a chance to interact.
Yeah. And so like you were saying, I feel like you've interacted with so many women who do that. And often our role in the church is criticized from people within the church and outside the church. And this won't be a conversation where we break down women in the priesthood. I think that's a super important conversation, and I want to dedicate a whole episode to it. We may tap into it a little bit because it's kind of hard to have this conversation without mentioning the priesthood. But today I mostly want to focus on what we can do, real things that we can do as women to contribute and to step up to our call, to magnify our calling and our purpose as women. So that's the goal for today. You mentioned Magnify focuses on empowering women to shine Christ's light. So tell us why you think this is a vital message for today's women.
Well, and I know we're going to get into President Nelson's A Plea to My Sister, right? So I don't want to over-reference it yet.
No, you can. Okay. If we're going there now, we're going there now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just... So the words that are in that talk that probably most of us recall is that we are that women will show up in the church as distinct and different in happy ways. That's the line. I think that's the line from
ways. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the line from President Kimball that then President Nelson quotes. And I think the reason it's just so vital today and it's part of our mission is, one, women need these resources. Like, we need to find that confidence, and we need one another to keep sharing and teaching and building that confidence for future generations. And I think that being that distinct and different is a really big, like, I would call it a war cry or like a rallying call for us women, because and again, to quote him, it's a sin-sick world. There's so much going on, and I think that that's what we get to do as women of faith, women who follow Christ. Any woman who follows Christ.
Yeah, and in your experience, like, what is the joy that comes with being that distinct? Is that hard for you, or do you feel like it's a joyful call?
That's a really good question, actually. It's hard. It's always hard to, like, be distinct and different, and to be happy, right? That's like also a tough call.
Totally.
It's really easy to kind of not follow that per se, but I guess what my experience has been is that as I watch women share their testimony and share these things and live these things out, it's just a beautiful thing to follow. That's really all I can say. It's magnetic and it is influential.
Yeah.
It makes a difference in big ways and in small ways.
Yeah, it makes me think of when I felt like I should start defending the church on TikTok and on social media. And I'm not here to say that that's what everyone's call is to do.
No, absolutely. Totally. There's times for some people who are going to show up in big ways and in small ways. I agree with that.
And when I was showing up on TikTok, it was overwhelming at times. And like, it was so challenging. And I remember being about 6 months into doing it, and I was just like, I think I'm done. Like, I remember just being so overwhelmed with the criticism. And I went to pray. And when I like need God to talk to me, I take my journal with me to pray.
Oh, nice.
I'm like,
it's a good practice.
I need you to tell me. So I take my journal, I'm praying, and I'm like, Heavenly Father, I felt like you wanted me to do this, but this is too much. I can't do it anymore. This is overwhelming. I don't want to be distinct in this way. And I was writing in my journal, like, the social media is your means to reach millions of people with your testimony. And at the time, I hadn't gone viral to that extent. I had only I think my biggest video was like maybe 100K, and that was like huge for me.
Yeah, totally.
And I just wrote this down, and I'm continuing to like pray and think about it. And I felt motivated. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. And then within the week, I had a video go viral over 1 million in a day. And like it went on to 3 million. And it was so funny to look back. I was showing my husband, Tanner. I'm like, the Spirit literally told me that this was going to happen. And I didn't take it literal. Like, of course, social media is a means to reach millions of people, whatever. But I share that experience because, like, it's, even though I felt called to do it, it was still so challenging and overwhelming that I was at my breaking point. And it was a cool experience for me to see, like, no, God is my advocate in helping me to fulfill this role. And so if you're overwhelmed by the call to be distinct and different, know that your Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, like, are your advocate to help you fulfill this. Like, I don't want this to be overwhelming.
Yeah. How did you, in those moments, like, still rely on that promise that God is your advocate then? Because I couldn't imagine being like, especially on social media.
Yeah.
Women tear each other down on social media.
Oh my gosh, it's so sick.
Yeah, and we do it all the time.
Yeah, I feel like it really just comes in those moments where the Spirit is just like there to strengthen you. It's so simple, and it almost sounds silly to be like, oh yeah, the Spirit told you that you're going to see 1 million views on social media. But it's like, no, it's so simple in the way that I felt peace in continuing to post. Yeah. And then also it comes by other women sending me messages of support. Yes. Like that's a huge way that God shows me that, hey, you're doing this for me, and I'm here for you too. Yeah. Well, that's a great way of putting that, because like you just said, not everyone's going to be called to be a podcast producer for church content. Yeah. And not everyone's going to be an influencer in the church space, or however you want to put that. But like those little comments or those little angels of support that these women can become, that's also distinct and different. And I don't want to forget that. And I think we should put a pin in that, because
that's like as we're asking the different ways that we could all go about that, I think there's countless examples.
I totally agree. So a few weeks ago, I got to meet President Camille Johnson, the General Society President of the church.
Amazing.
And I went up to talk to her and introduce myself to her. And she's like, tell me what you do. And I'm like, I have a podcast where I talk about the church. And she's holding both of my hands. We're like so close to each other. Like our noses are practically touching. And she just looks me in the eyes. And she's like, Lauren, the call for sisters to speak up was not given to pacify us. We are called by God to do this work. And I've heard this before, but like when she said it, it just like hit me so hard. I'm like, not given to pacify us. Like, it's not just to like meet our needs and be like, oh, you're needed. Like, come join. She's like, no, this comes directly from our Heavenly Father. And I don't know. It was just a really cool experience that I want everyone to know that Camille would hold your hand and say the exact, President Johnson would hold your hand and say the exact same thing to you.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a really unique experience. I was thinking about this when you shared that note with me. I had to do a little research, but President Nelson's A Plea to My Sisters was his first address as the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And so President Packer had died in April, just after General Conference that year of 2015. And then President Nelson gets up and he remarks about the men he had to serve with who passed away. It was L. Tom Perry and President Packer had both passed that year. And the first thing he comments on is the power of their wives and the influence that he saw there. I think that that President Johnson is right. It's not to pacify us, and it's such a great, rich text that people need to study. But women, especially, we need to keep studying this over and over again, because I've learned so much from what we've kind of talked about the call. That it's not just to pacify us; it is to speak up and speak out.
Yeah. I want to know, in your life, in what ways has God prepared you to fulfill that call?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I am a talker. I'm always been a yapper, a chatter. So it's not that hard for me to speak out. In fact, I'm sure my family members would be like, yeah, no, Sarah's not afraid of being a little bold and sort of just, I can't, I don't let things stay in my mind or my heart. I just, I have to expel them. And then I don't hold a grudge, they're out. Yeah. But, so I think that there's a lot that can be said for somebody, for your inherent divine qualities. And so there's going to be people who identify with me, and there will be people who don't. Yeah. And that's okay. If you're not a speaker, speak outer. It's okay. But I would say that then, and I've looked at that as a weakness actually quite often at times.
I'm sure. In school and growing up.
Yes, Hermione Granger, Yeah. And then I guess to bring up the scripture, I know that God can make weakness become strength. And so I feel like I've now just had to take the time to wield that into something that's useful, and not just, and then learning when to hold your tongue or learning when not to. But I've also just been led. Yeah, there's just been little droplets along the way of you need to go into this pathway. You need to, and whether that be professionally or not, I just think that I just have a bit of a moral compass there. It's always been inside me to know what's right and wrong and how to say it. And I think that you can ignore that, or you can let God prevail. You can let God say, hey, these are your skills and gifts, so use them. Move that way.
I really like that. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you're really good at following your moral compass. How did you learn how to hear the Spirit or the voice of God in your life?
That's a really good question too.
Sorry, it wasn't in the notes.
No, and it's okay, because I actually, it's funny. You just were talking about how you you go to prayer and you bring a journal, and you're okay, this is going to for sure get me some revelation. I think I'll be honest and I'll admit this. I don't know that I've actually nailed down and figured out how to hear God's voice in my life. I think that's something that I get really envious of, and I've had conversations with people who, when they're yeah, I just knew God was telling me this. I'm have I ever known that? Truly. I think I take a lot of steps into the dark. Maybe I have some internal courage that allows me to do that. And it's all hindsight. For me, it's always oh yeah, God was there, but I do not call it out in the moment. Maybe I should work on that. Well, I definitely should work on that. But I do get like jealous of people who are like, I knew it was God. I knew God, or I know I'll come to this prayer and it'll get answered. I don't know that. I don't.
Yeah.
But I just do it.
Wait, thanks for sharing that, because I think more people will resonate with that.
Yeah, it's been something I'm actually like in the midst of that struggle too.
That's so interesting. And I think that's okay. Like,
Yes.
I do think that maybe your gift is having the courage to step forward and maybe not know the outcome. And then you look back and you say, oh, okay, well, this was obviously a direction from God. But just following your gut. I
think any direction I would have taken would have probably been okay too. Does that make sense? Like sometimes, and I think that's not true for everyone, but it's true for me. Like as long as I'm not going all the way wrong, it's right. It's okay. And there's always adjustments along the path. But yeah, I would say that that's a little bit more of how I operate spiritually.
I think that can be true for everybody, because like God is going to magnify you where you are.
Yes.
And if we put so much pressure and stress on like being in the right place at the right time, honestly, the anxiety is going to keep you from fulfilling anything.
Yeah.
And so take off the pressure and just trust that, hey,
it's so hard too.
In Elder Bednar's words, like, be a good boy, be a good girl, and like you're going to be where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's all it takes. Like,
yeah.
There's so many options, and there's ways to be good in so many aspects of life.
Yeah, and going back to that, live differently. You don't have to do it in like these distinct and happy ways are small. They're not like every decision I ever make is going to lean on to God's revelation for me. I personally, I always need to make that note. Personally, that's just not how it works for me.
Mm-hmm. What are you learning from the women of the Magnify community right now?
I love this question because I feel like every time I interact with women in this community, be it just in the comment section on our social media stuff, or what the actual women on the podcast share, or members of my team, I'm learning that women who follow Christ are the Magnify woman. So you don't have to look a certain way, you don't have to be a certain way.
They're not holding certain callings.
No, there's not anything specific that I'm like, it's just that, and it's back to what you were saying too. Every woman has some kind of role to play in building the kingdom of God. And it could be that you're on social media jumping up and saying the things, or it's that you're just in the comments saying, this was beautiful, thank you for sharing. Or it's that you're texting your friend to say, like, I think that you need to hear this, or I've just been thinking about you in these ways. I think that we really in our church have like misconceptions about what women can and can't do, or should and shouldn't do. And I really, like, the God I know doesn't think that. He doesn't think that about women. We're not second-class citizens. We're not just here to fulfill one small purpose of the creation and the plan. We have so much more to offer.
Yeah. I think one of those big misconceptions that I wanted to touch on today is, I think we put such a focus on women's ability to have children.
Yes.
And play the role of a mother, and like that's their sphere of influence. And I think it's a common fallacy in the church, because we want to compare it to the priesthood. Like, oh, women have this ability to create life, and men have this ability to carry God's power. Yep. And I do not think they're comparable. And I think we need to stop doing that.
Yeah.
Because there are so many women who might not have that opportunity in this life. And my influence did not start the day that I had my child.
No, absolutely not.
And so that's just one misconception that I often see. And I don't want anyone, I just want it to be clear that, like, that's not the only thing that God has created you for.
Yes, I would echo your thoughts exactly. I'm not a mom. I love children. I actually really love and respect the gender roles that we've kind of been taught, where, and that are in the Family Proclamation, right, about men are the providers, women are the nurturers. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's where we're getting stuck is like, now we're siloed into those things.
Yeah.
Women are providers. Women provide life. I mean, they provide wisdom. They provide so many things. And sometimes they are the providers in their family financially. Men are nurturers. Men can be so nurturing. The moments I've had with my dad or my grandpa who know how to nurture me just as well, right? And I think that culturally, I don't think this comes from any type of doctrine. I think culturally, we've maybe somehow put a pedestal of like providing's up here and then nurturing's just the step below it because it's in the home.
Right.
But I think that's something we should undo. I mean, nurturing is like an amazing gift. It's an amazing gift that women do have. And I think it is a bit more naturally what we're naturally inclined toward.
I agree.
Yeah. I think that I really appreciate you saying that there's like misconceptions. Can I throw this quote in at you?
Yes, please.
So have you seen Little Women, the 2019 Greta Gerwig?
Okay, amazing, yes.
Yeah, it's like my favorite movie of all time. I love that movie. And I actually don't know if this quote is from the Greta version or it's like some form of Louisa May Alcott's work because I've read Little Women, but it's been a long time. So I can't remember. I was kind of trying to find it. But you'll recall. It's the Saoirse Ronan's line after Laurie's proposed to her and then she leaves and she says no. And then he comes back. Well, actually, she comes back because Beth is dying. Mm-hmm. And Marmee and her are upstairs and they're talking. And
yes, the best.
You know the line. She says, women have minds and souls as well as just hearts. They've got ambition and they've got talent as well as just beauty. And I think that that quote is like kind of like a guiding quote in my life now, because I think that it's not saying we have either or. That's back to like what the gender roles are. We have minds and souls and hearts. So we're good at the heart thing, but we also have minds and souls. We're good at the beauty thing. We bring beauty into the world and into the room and whatever, and we value that too, but we've got talent. We've got ambition. I don't know. That's just a little bit where I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit in that way.
I love that so much. Making me cry over here
I know,
already.
It's just like, I mean, and you're I know you're kind of a movie girl too, you and your husband, right? And it's like that movie, if you haven't seen it, now's a reminder. Go watch it again.
It's so good.
It's so good.
When you were saying that quote, I'm like, God created us with those gifts, with that for a reason. He didn't create us just to have a heart and to be beautiful. Like he created us with a mind and a soul to think and to be free thinkers and ambitions. So it's beautiful. And I've felt this in the church growing up. I don't know if like we're blessed because of the generation we grew up in. Yeah. I have always felt the opportunity to pursue my ambitions and to grow. And I know that's not true for other generations.
We're like the misconceptions of old, I think, are a little bit like the sweet and the saccharine voice, and that's just really cultural, and not everyone has that, and even in that generation either.
Yeah, true.
But it is
and it doesn't just come from the church. I think that's an important thing to recognize. Like this is a society, like a culture that comes from society.
Yes.
And earlier generations, and I think that our organization is heavily influenced by the society that we live in. And I know that inspiration comes line upon line. And we see those changes. And like I said, I feel from my experience growing up in the church that I always have that opportunity. And I feel most women in our generation feel that, and younger will continue to feel that more and more.
It's progress. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think we can like celebrate it. But sometimes I see people just like continuing to hold the anger from those generations. And
well, and don't you feel like, Lauren, the pendulum's almost swinging? Women are always criticized.
It's so true.
Like now women who are, we get like, what are the misconceptions of old? Yeah, those things, the little bit like you're second class to your husband or something, right? That's kind of an old, and now the misconception is like these women have to be like Mormon mom influencers or like the perfectionism and all this, and it's like
break the gender roles. It's so true. We can't win, and we need to just be advocates for women because Christ is.
Absolutely.
And that's how I have felt in my life, like even in times where maybe I was diminished a little bit with my callings, or like something was overstepped because maybe I'm a woman. Maybe it wasn't because I'm a woman, just who I was. Even in moments of that where I was maybe a little offended by leadership, when I got on my knees, it was so clear to me where God stood. And I felt so confident and who he saw me as and what he wanted me to do. And in some cases, I just got creative. And that's another blessing that I think women have, like another gift that we do sometimes have to be a little more creative.
Yeah. Something about the Magnify community that I love that I think, again, reflects all the women who choose to be followers of Christ. One of our team's kind of like missions and just how we drive at what topics we're picking and stuff is to assume strength. So we pick topics that we don't want to get bogged down in the like, we know it's hard, and so here's the way to, which is like, sometimes you need those topics, but I love how even just you and I are interacting. It's like, no, we're strong. We assume the strength. These women are powerful people who we are only here to add to those thoughts in the direction that you're already living your life.
That's why it's so good. That's why the Magnify podcast is so good.
Well, I appreciate that.
Because there are people who focus on the weakness, and I think that holds us back.
It does.
Well, should I go into the Ardith Cap story?
I love this story.
Okay. There was an episode of Magnify where you guys talked about the life of Ardith Cap. And I wanted to reference some of the stories and the clips from that episode because it was so beautiful.
It was a beautiful episode.
If you don't know who Ardith Cap was, she was the general president of Young Women's from 1984 to 1992. During her presidency, she played a pivotal role in shaping the spiritual foundation of young women worldwide. And I think it's interesting to also note that she didn't have any children of her own. Like, she wasn't blessed to have children. So the young women were her children that she took care of. And her influence is immeasurable because she introduced the Young Women's values. She refined the Young Women's theme and revamped the Personal Progress Program and created the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet.
So crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, those are all in crazy accomplishments.
Yeah, big
and
checklist.
All the things that she influenced stayed relevant for almost 50 years. Yeah. Like, it was an impact in my life, like the Personal Progress Program and the Young Women's theme. Like, I just think of all those things that really shaped me. And so I'm so grateful for Ardith Cap. And I didn't even know who she was until I listened to Magnify.
I didn't either till we were throwing this episode.
When Sister Cap was serving in the Young Women's presidency, she felt inspired to update the standards for the youth. And she had worked on it with probably her leadership team, but it didn't move forward at all. And so she kind of set it aside for a period of time. One day she was called to President Monson's office to be informed that one of her counselors was being called to a different leadership role. So it was just like a logistical meeting, like nothing special. After the discussion, President Monson said, "Is there anything else that we need to talk about today?" And she took that opportunity to present the draft of the youth booklet. And President Monson reviewed it, read it, and said, "We're going to share this in General Conference in a few weeks."
Crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
Reflecting on this experience, Ardith Cap shared a simple, profound lesson. She said, "Be prepared. The timing may not be what you think. It's right." And I just love how Ardith felt a prompting, was inspired to do something, and it didn't come in the time that she probably thought that this was going to come forward sooner than it was.
Right.
And then it didn't work out. But then when she saw the opportunity to present it again to President Monson, she took it, and then it came out in the Lord's timing. And so I really feel that if we just trust in the Lord, like He trusts us to keep moving His work forward, and He opens doors for us.
Yeah, that's what Sherry actually shared on the podcast. She said, this is from Sherry, kind of reflecting on that experience. If the Lord trusts you, He will both open doors for you and allow you to open doors for others. So that's like, I love that story too. I'm glad you pinpointed it from that conversation because think about the door that was opened. The Lord obviously trusted Sister Cap, and then the door was open for her to talk to President Monson. And then from then on, now look at all the doors that have been opened because of that, like through her. And I think this makes me think of what you were sharing, where you were on your knees and you were like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not sharing the stuff on TikTok anymore. And then you had the thought, like, this will be the gateway for millions. And you walked through the door. I mean, like, you are following that same counsel. That's the counsel that, like, that's kind of the takeaway from Sherry Dew that I learned listening to that episode was, when the door opens, you got to walk through it. That's part of what we need to be kind of focusing on as women, I would say. We've got a lot of opportunities that will be coming our way and that are coming our way. And sometimes you have to, and back to what I was saying, I'm not always sure if it's the right move. I'm not getting the same kind of revelation you are, but let's walk courageously through that door. It's going to be walking into the darkness sometimes.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy. Like, it's never easy
No.
to walk through the door.
Gosh, no. I wish it were easy.
I know, but that's how simple as it can be. I love in President Nelson's address, A Plea to My Sister.
Yeah.
He shared this quote, and I have it in here somewhere. President Nelson said, "Sisters, do you realize the breadth and scope of your influence when you speak those things that come to your heart and mind as directed by the Spirit?" And I'll add do. Speak or do those things. And I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier and talk about the small things that people do and like the influence. You don't have to be in the Sister Cap calling.
Right.
Like you don't have to be on social media, right? I think that it's as simple as following the good thought, what is that quote from Sister Kimball? Never suppress a generous thought. Like that's my motto in life. Anytime I get a prompting, I call it a prompting. It could just be a thought to do good. I take it as, okay, I'm going to do this and see like what comes of it.
That's an amazing gift.
Well, and it's not always easy and it's hard. And the hardest parts are usually just to text random people. Like when I get the impression to text someone that I haven't talked to for a while.
Oh, interesting. Like you're saying that's harder than like the calling of like,
literally,
I'm teaching Sunday school this week or I'm going to Relief Society.
That's how I feel. In some ways, it's easier for me to get on social media and say I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints than it is to act on the simple prompting to go knock on my neighbor's door.
Yeah, that's interesting.
We need to take courage in doing these little things because that's how we make an influence.
Yeah. And I think women make influences in so many ways. I think one of your questions that you had got me thinking about was what we're talking about, like where we've seen it in ways that aren't from a formal calling.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This question kind of stumped me when I was thinking about this conversation we were going to have today. And because like, obviously you can go into the kind of cliches of that, like, it's not a formal calling, but like ministering is a great way to do that, or motherhood and being an aunt and being a grandma and being, those things are never formal. I mean, being a mom is a formal calling, let's be honest.
Yeah, but yes.
But it's not
yes
the same.
No.
Where you're Art of the Cap and you're standing in the throngs of these types of people. But so I was like, I do wonder how have I seen this? Because I have seen it, and what I kind of wanted to pinpoint is this is again from a plea to my sisters from President Nelson. He lists, and I wrote them all down, not all of them, there's actually tons in this talk about adjectives and character traits that women that we either need to have or that he's seen that he wants us to keep acting on. So I want, as you listen, I want to hear which ones you think stand out to you from this list of character traits. But he says we need women who have strength, who can show their conversion, their conviction, they're organized, they speak out, they have an ability to lead, they have wisdom, they use their voice, they have an executive ability to plan. I really like that one. They direct, they administer, they teach, there's courage, there's devotion, they are fearless, they have vision, they have grit, they have love. And like those are not formal callings. None of those in that list are something you have to be called to do. But everybody I know, every woman I know has one or more or many combination of those things. That's how they're sharing their influence. What one of those was on the list that you're like, that's me, I have that?
Oh, man. I don't like that question. I was thinking of the one that I needed more of.
Which one do you need more of?
Well, I was thinking of organization. And
okay.
I'm like...
That's shocking. I don't even know you very well, but I don't believe you.
I mean, I love an organized closet, but organizing my time is not something I'm good at.
Okay, fair, yeah.
And I've just been praying for that lately, is like, help me to manage my time better.
And isn't that interesting that would be like something that could lead you to have more of an influence?
Totally.
Yeah.
And I know that's something that's holding me back. I was even talking to my bishop about this yesterday. I am in my Relief Society presidency, and there's a lot that comes with that. And I have children and I have this podcast.
That's a big deal. Man,
I was feeling so overwhelmed, and I was like talking to my husband about it. I'm like, I'm going to go talk to the bishop. Not that I'm going to say, please like release me. I would never say that, but just be like, hey, I'm struggling in this capacity. And I always say yes to everything.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm not good at saying no.
Us people pleasers, huh?
And I want to do it to my fullest. I want to do my best, but I feel like every aspect of my life is getting 30% of Lauren. And I was just like talking to him about this, and he was like, the Lord has called you for your strengths and for your weaknesses.
Yep.
And I was like, interesting. And he can also fortify you to make your weaknesses into your strengths. And maybe that's part of the lesson that you're going to learn in this season of life. And I feel like I'm learning it in every season of my life because every season gets busier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that my influence will be better and stronger as I work on my organization.
Interesting. I love that. Thank you. That's great. What one do you think you are strong at? I'm going to tell you one I think you are. I think that you're fearless.
Okay.
I can just sense that. And you're not afraid to say things the way they are. And if you read the talk, he says like fearless in their ability to shepherd children. You know, it's not just the one character trait. It's like in certain aspects of life. I think one that I have a strength of is I'm really good at directing, actually. I can like organize and rally things. And
great producer.
Yeah, I'm a producer. So I do love to, so direct is one of those things. And I've never until today and prepping for this and reading President Nelson's talk thought about that as my influence. I didn't think like, oh, that's my influence. I just thought that's just a bit about who I am. And so I think that's the goal of a lifetime as women is like, what are you good at and what do you want to work on? And then tap into that to be your influence amongst your peers.
Okay, that's so good, Sarah. That is so inspired. I love that. And well, it's cool too to see how it influenced you and like reading and thinking about it.
Right. And now I have to take it a step further, right? Like, so sure, I'm good at directing. Now, how can I do that to help the kingdom move forward?
Yeah.
Right.
That's one thing I've loved. And I'm sure you've seen this doing the podcast. What I love about my podcast is I sit down with people who I don't even really know.
Yeah.
And we talk about the most tender things that are on our heart.
Right. We're sharing tears.
Yes. And I'm like, I feel that one of the biggest blessings is getting to see who God sees you as and the strengths that he sees in you and your ability. And I get to sit down with people every week and see that in them. And we're all so different and we have so much to contribute. And that's like very evident to me. Yeah. How have you seen that in the Magnify community?
Thank you for sharing that, because that is also a gift that you are developing and working on to see me as God sees me. Like, that's a really tender gift. I think I would probably just echo what you said. I've been able to see that distinct and different thing come forward, that President Nelson's using those words, and that women are strong, and that we are, just as President Nelson says in A Plea to My Sisters, we're vital associates. I mean, that's a great, and I'm seeing that every single time I get to interact with women.
And I wish I could just like look at each one of you listening to this podcast and say that same thing. Like, right. I wish you could all sit in this seat and we could have a conversation. And that's partly why we talk on social media, because I really feel that everyone listening is an expert in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as we're working through these things, like, none of us are perfect at it. And that's the beauty of having this truth in our life. And if I can help just one person, one sister, hold on to that truth and be able to see what God sees in you, like, I've done my job.
Yeah, and I would like to say too, like, I feel like I'm maybe I hope I haven't come across as like, I get these opportunities and so I've figured it all out. Like, it is like a lifelong pursuit for me. And sometimes, I'll produce something or I'll sit down and it will take a long time for me to really understand what it meant or how it processed for me. And again, not everyone's going to have the opportunities to interact this way, but we are in communities the way we're meant to be and able to interact with women of all different. There's just social media and all these other things. They've opened up the way for us to interact across globes and reach our hands across state lines or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah, and I think we're better at that than the men.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Like, especially even social media. Like, you brought that up. Like, I think I see so many amazing, faithful women that I'm like, the men can't do this. I'm sorry. Like, when the men are trying to be on social media, they're not very good at it. And it just doesn't come off the same. And I also think not as many men are on social media. Yeah. But I do think that partly is our territory. It's the same reason why women influencers like take over the world.
It's wild.
It is our territory, and it can be as simple as posting a picture of your family and showing that distinct happiness that you have.
And if it's not social media, if that's not your thing, it's just like when you have real conversations with people, or when you go to your ministering assignments or whatever, do it then. Be distinct and different.
Totally. And I'm not trying to just say why we're better than men, but again, we're better at the men at that too. Like my husband goes and works out with his friends and I'm like, oh,
what did you talk about?
How's the new baby? And he's like, oh, we didn't talk about it. I'm
I
like,
forgot they had one. Yeah.
Don't you want to make sure they're okay?
Oh my gosh.
And like, again, that's part of our God-given gift.
Yeah.
And that's such a blessing.
I totally agree.
I do want to talk a little bit about the criticism and talk about what we can do, because sometimes I think this is a tricky part of the conversation. I love when you were talking about the proclamation and you said, I love the roles that we play. And like, I love our church leaders and I sustain them and I believe in the direction of the church where it's going. I'm not going to get on my podcast and criticize them for where things are going. And in the Ardith Cap Magnify episode, Sherry Dew does a really good job in talking about how we can make an influence for change in the right way, in the means that God organized in his church.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that everything is perfect and it's going to be like this forever. Like there are needs for change in our organization and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But we can only make we can make the greatest influence by following the way that it was organized by God. And so Sherry says that when she was in leadership, she was probably wrestling with something and working through something. She doesn't share what it was.
Right.
But Ardith came to her and gave her this advice, and it really stuck with Sherry. She said, Sherry, you can't pound down a door at the church. It doesn't work like that. But if you have something to say or something meaningful to contribute, be ready, because the door will open, and when it opens, you better walk through it right then. Goes back to the door analogy that we're talking about.
Yeah, back to that door analogy. I think that there are totally times when things probably feel like unjust. Well, let me say that again. There are times when things feel unjust, not probably. And I think that the patience, I actually think we can learn a lot from the previous generations. Like, I know that that's where maybe a lot of the criticism is coming from, but there's also something to be said about how they were patient and they were able to sort of see through what they knew was coming. And Sherry does say that too. She says that her predecessors in the callings that she was in say stuff like, you guys are doing stuff we could only dream about. And that was in 2002. Yeah. And so I think that maybe just sometimes take courage in the fact that you want to be here to see it. And so as much as the frustration is totally there, also acknowledge President Nelson, he said in A Plea to My Sisters that there was a moment in a state conference or a stake council where they like turned to the primary president and said, do you have anything to say? And she was like, yes. And it changed the direction. Mm-hmm. And so speak out when walk through those doors when they're open and do it when they're not open too. Like, I think that Ardith Cap she was prepping. Yeah,
she was trying probably. It kind of mentions that it wasn't going somewhere.
Right. They were prepping and they were waiting and maybe they brought it up a couple times. Maybe it flatlined for a minute, and again, but it's just we chip away at things until they come to fruition. And I'm not going to pretend that it's not frustrating for some. It totally is. Yeah. And I don't know if I have the answer to that, but patience.
No. I think patience and faith.
Yeah.
Faith that like God has our best interest in mind, and He cares how we contribute, and He wants us to, and also giving people the benefit of the doubt, I think is important. Like, I think we need to give grace. I don't think that our church leaders, like, for example, I had a sister reach out to me on social media after General Conference, and she's like, I'm so hurt that only 3 women spoke all General Conference. We just heard from so many men. And I can see the frustration. And as someone, I relate more to women. Yes. The women talks are always my favorite. Because I'm a woman. And they just resonate with me. But I thought, do you think that they did it despite women? Are they doing it?
It's intention.
Yeah. Are they doing it because they don't think that women have more to contribute or say? Or are they doing it because that's the way it's been organized for generations?
Yeah, it's hard to undo things.
Yeah. And they're like, okay, we're going to have one person from each leadership position speak. So they have, right, and women's, Early Society, primary. I'm sorry, it's just they're stuck in their ways. Like,
Yeah.
again, their intention is not to cause harm,
Totally.
or that they think that women are less valued. And so I think we can give people the benefit of the doubt and be patient and helping them and helping growth happen.
Yeah. And back to what you said that your experience with President Johnson was. She said it was not to pacify us that we were told to speak out.
Yeah.
So just keep doing it. Maybe endurance is an important key role in the gospel living. Like, endure and keep going.
Oh my gosh. Okay, a story just came to my mind that I do not have prepped.
That's okay.
I feel like I screenshotted it a long time ago. All right, it took us a minute, but we found it. So this was given at a BYU Idaho devotional in, let's see what the month was, April 2023 by Elder Kyle McKay of the 70. And he ends his talk with this story, and I've just remembered it because it's so profound. So he says, I close by sharing the unshakable witness of someone who built upon a sure and certain foundation. In the winter of 1842, a young single adult named Jane Elizabeth Manning joined the church in Connecticut. With several other converts, including some of her own family, she made the 1,000-mile journey to Nauvoo, most of it on foot. Jane endured persecution with the saints in Nauvoo. She felt wrenching grief when Joseph and Hiram were murdered. She crossed the plains in 1847 and became a beloved friend and minister in the Salt Lake Valley for decades. She rejoiced in the doctrine of the temple and contributed to its construction, but she was not able to receive the highest blessings of the temple because Jane was black. At that time, members of black African descent were prohibited from participating in the endowment and sealing ordinances. On December 27, 1884, Jane wrote a plaintive petition to the president of the church, whom she knew personally. Acknowledging her race and the church's policy then in place, she pleaded to be allowed to receive the blessings of the endowment and sealing. She writes, God promised Abraham that in his seed all the nations of the earth should be blessed, and as this is the fullness of all dispensation, is there no blessing for me? Her request was not granted. The church president to whom she petitioned was John Taylor. She made similar petitions to President Woodruff and Joseph F. Smith, who similarly upheld the race restriction at the time. It would have been easy and understandable for Jane to pack it in, shut it down, and walk away. But she didn't. Why? Because her foundation was sure and certain in the truths that she had learned. Near the end of her life, Jane identified by name Brigham Young, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, Lawrence of Snow, and Joseph F. Smith, not as men who upheld the church's race restriction for priesthood and temple blessings, but rather she identified them as good, great, and holy men who others should listen to and obey. She died with this simple but sure testimony. I want to say right here that my faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ, as taught by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is as strong today, nay, it is, if possible, stronger than it was the day I was first baptized. I pay my tithes and offerings and keep the word of wisdom. I go to bed early and rise early, and I try in my feeble way to set a good example to all. Now, I'm not going to try to say that the restriction on blacks in the temple is similar to the restrictions that women have in the church. It's not. But if Jane can have a sure foundation of this being Christ's church and upholding these men to be prophets, then I can too.
I wholeheartedly agree. That story, thank you for sharing that. I hadn't heard that. And I think of personal examples where I'm like, we've all maybe seriously or not very seriously decided I'm throwing in the towel. I'm out. I'm just like that quote said. It would have been easier for her to just
pack it up. She had every reason.
And I think of my own personal experiences, and it is I guess a scripture that always kind of comes to mind, and it's very like a tender one to me. Is I don't know the reference. I'm not very good at the scripture references, but it's somewhere in Matthew maybe, where Christ asks, "Will you also go away?" And then Peter replies, "To whom will we go?" And I think that's what the conviction of women, back to your question of what have I seen, is as I've been able to have this extreme privilege of interacting with women of faith like this. I mean, that's their resounding reply. To whom will we go? Like, we only have each other and the Lord to do this. That's why we're here.
That's so beautiful. And it's how I feel. Like, the Spirit just like hit me as you're saying that. To whom will I go? Like, I believe Christ is my advocate, and I believe this is his church.
Right.
And I believe that I'm able to do more because I am a member of this church and because I'm a woman. And so I'm grateful.
I love that. Because you're a woman, you can do more.
Yeah, I really believe that.
It's part of your calling.
And everyone listening, you can do more too. I totally believe it. And I think this is a great way to wrap up the episode. Is there anything else that you want to share that you thought of as you prepared?
No, I think I would. We can end there. Or this final thought is that assume strength. Back to that. The Lord assumes it of you, and we assume it of each other. Just take heart that that's what we're working toward. And President Nelson's thoughts in A Plea to My Sister. He says, I plead with the sisters of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to step forward, take your rightful and needful place in your home, in your community, and in the kingdom of God more than you ever have before. I think that's what we're here to do. I mean, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And I know you guys can do it. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining.
Thank you for having me. It was beautiful.
And I feel uplifted. I feel inspired. So I hope as you listened, you felt the same and you're encouraged. And just know that your influence is strong. I know it is.
I love it.
So don't diminish it.
Perfect.
All right. Bye, friends.
Girl power.